Well, good morning. It is great to be with you this morning. Did a little different this morning. I got to speak in person at our Madison campus. So normally I'd say, hello, our Madison campus. Got to speak live, but I will say good morning to our Bradford campus. It's good to have you. And it's great to have you guys here this morning as we have the last Sunday of 2024. Is it kind of hard to believe this year has went so quickly? For a lot of us, it may be a blur. For some of you, it may have moved slowly. But I want to talk about how to live this year different with what I will talk about intentionality. One that will allow us not just to live 2025 different, but if we learn the principles in living this year, it can make a difference moving forward. As we approach New Year's Day, I see two extremes that people take. Neither one are very helpful. The first is I see people who just kind of make New Year's resolutions that are really no more than wishes or dreams. Ones that have no steps of action, and one that's just kind of broad. I think I'll do this. You may see people post it. Now, there's certain ones. The number one, as you can probably think, has to do with our health. So normally the number one is I'm going to lose weight or get in shape. After that, it's the one that comes in next is financial. I'm going to get out of debt. I'm going to save more money. Next comes in is relationships. That, this is the year I'm going to find someone, or this is the year I'm going to improve the relationship we have. But those are the most. And a matter of fact, about 40% of Americans will sit down and they'll make resolutions. A lot of them will put it publicly. You'll see it on Facebook, Instagram. Here's what I'm doing next year. How successful do you think those people are? See, we laugh, right, because we've done it. Do you know that just before the first week is over, 23% of people have already missed it? And that's just 1 week. So it's like, I'm going to exercise once a week. They didn't make it, or I'm going to, not eat whatever it is. After 1 week, 23% are gone. By the time you get to February, 80% of all resolutions have already been busted. And only 9% of people actually make it through the year, and at the end of the year say, yes, I got that resolution like I wanted. See, for most people, a resolution is nothing more than a daydream, just hoping it will come true, but not having any actions to make real changes. The second extreme I see people making is almost that 60% that says, hey, why make a resolution? It's not going to work. It did work for 9%, but it won't work, so they don't do anything. And they treat the end of 1 year just like the next go. They're just kind of living life linear. It's year after year after year after year without any real changes that are happening. And see, I think that's wrong too. I think God wants us to understand that He's a God of firsts. He wants to understand that life isn't just linear in that beginning and end, but it has a cyclical nature in itself. As a matter of fact, we see this. When God created the world, we see 6 days of creation, and then we see on the seventh day He rests. Not because He was in need of, or He was tired, but He did it as an example that we'll see later that He commands the nation of Israel. Once He forms a nation, a theocracy, and He gives them these laws, these commands, one of the laws He gives them is they are to work for 6 days, and on the seventh day, they are to rest. See, again, there was that cyclical. But before then, before the nation of Israel was found as a nation, which happened after they entered into the land of Canaan and conquered and formed as a nation, before then, if you went to any nation, to any group of people, you would see they were living life kind of like this. Every day was the same. You got up, you'd eat, you'd work, you'd come home, you'd eat, you go to bed. You'd get up, you'd eat, you work, you go to work, come home, eat, go to bed. And it was kind of this running linear that just was there. And since they were in an agricultural society, people had to work really hard just to have enough to provide for their families. And God said, no, you guys are going to do different. You're going to cease from your work, and that word means labor. It means your job. It's not meant like the Pharisees tried to do, where you kind of just sat and stared at a wall. No, it meant their vocation. And so all of a sudden it changed. All these days would happen, and since the Jews saw days different than us, if you read in creation, it says evening and morning, it was the first day. So in the Jewish thought, when sundown happens, that's the start of the next day. And that's why sundown at Friday is their start of their Sabbath, of that seventh day of the week. And so that's when it would start. And so now, where every day they would come and eat and go to bed, that was the day in which they came and they ate, and usually it was a special meal. It was a little different than the rest of the meals. Later on, when there was a temple, the ones in Jerusalem would go to the temple and worship. The ones who had synagogues would go to a synagogue on that Friday evening, which they still, Reformed Jewish still go to synagogues on Friday evening. They would go and have that time. But here's different. The next morning, when they got up and ate, they didn't go and work. They stayed with their family. They enjoyed all that God had given them. They enjoyed their kids. They enjoyed their family. It was a time in which they were able to live differently. So all of a sudden now life had a cycle to it. Work for 7 days and then rest. We see God created that cycle in nature too, and we would see that we have the seasons. And even in that time, there would be in that rural time, there'd be spring when you work really hard and you were to plant, the crops that were there, and then they would grow, and you would have to weed, and you'd have to kind of protect them from different varmints who might come and hit it. And then they would come and they would grow, and then would come a harvest time, which was very hard to harvest, and yet it was a great time because now you got the fruit of your labor. Now you got to enjoy it. And there was more of a rest once harvest happened. And we see again that cycle. And so I think one of the things, if we look, we see that God has given us this ability to see life in senses of cycles. And because there's cycles, we need to live it with certain intentionality. And I think if we live it that way, it's different. So I would say don't fall into the camp who just makes that, resolution, you don't think about it. But also don't fall in the camp, say, it's just another day, it's just another... No, treat it as something new. This year is ending, a new year is starting, which gives an opportunity for a new beginning. In Psalms chapter 90, which was written by Moses, most likely written during his 40 years of wandering, meaning a very tough time for Israel. Remember, God frees them from Egypt, supernaturally takes them through the Red Sea, destroys most of the Egyptian army, brings them to the precipice right there at the Jordan River and says, cross and I'm going to establish you. I will fight for you. I will make you a great nation. But they send spies. 10 of them come back of the 12 and go, no, man, they're fortified. They're too big. We can't do that. We need a plan B, which angers God. And he says, okay, you guys don't want to enter the promised land, that's fine, you don't have to. And then for 40 years, if you were to draw a map of the 40-year wandering, you see them going in a big oval for 40 years. And you know what's happening during those 40 years? Those adults, those people who said, no, we won't go, are dying off. Millions of people are dying and being buried in the desert, and dying and being buried in the desert. And in Psalm 90, it's one place where Moses says, we're just like grass, here today, gone tomorrow. And that's what it seemed like. See, God was going to let that whole generation, that adult generation, pass away, and there would be a new generation. And that would be the generation that, again, would be brought then to the Jordan River, that Joshua would take and lead across, and they would be established as a nation. But during that time of wandering, Moses says this. It's not in your notes, but you can make note of it. It's Psalms 90, verse 12. And he says this, speaking to God, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. I'm going to say it again. Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. See, the inference here is that as we number our days, as we realize that we only have a finite amount of time, it can allow us to live wisely. See, sometimes we live life as if we're always going to have it. We take our health as if we're always going to enjoy it. We take the monetary blessings we have as if we're always going to have it, rather than saying, you know what, my time's limited. And because my time is limited, I need to live it differently. That allows me to be wise. Wisdom is seeing life from God's point of view, that larger vantage. So rather than looking at this day or this week or this month, you can even look at this life and say, God, what do I want to accomplish? Those of you who've been here for a while, some of you may be newer to Willowbrook, but Mark did something, it became an illustration, but it was something as action in his life. He wanted to be reminded to count his days, or I would say to count his weeks that he had with his kids. Understanding, those of us who have kids, when they're living with us, we control what they do. I mean, as they get teenagers, we give them more freedom, but basically we can say, yes, you can go, no, you can't. We can tell them, you can stay here, you can't. We kind of have a control. And then all of a sudden, they graduate from high school, they go to college, and all of a sudden, they're kind of on their own to a large degree. We may say you're coming home for the holidays. We have that tie of, I have tuition, that we can do. But for a large part, they're on their own. And then eventually they will get married. Most likely they will move out. And then we've lost that. And sometimes we lose the value because we're so busy living life. We don't focus on that precious small amount of time that we have with them. So Pastor Mark did something. He bought one of those large glass vases. And he bought a whole bunch of pink marbles and a whole bunch of green marbles. And then, starting from how old Mandy was, he looked at every week he had with her until she would graduate from high school, and he put that many pink marbles in. And then John Mark, who was younger, he put in green marbles, and then he mixed them up. And so on his desk, or next to his desk, you just see this huge thing, which people would ask about. Sometimes he could tell, but here's what he did. Once a week, he would go there, and he'd take out one pink marble, and he'd take out one green marble, reminded himself a week has been spent that he'll never get back, and those were taken out of the vase. Now, at first, the marbles kind of went down slowly, almost imperceptibly, but after a while, you could see they were going down, and they were getting lower, and there were more green marbles since John Mark was younger, till came the day when finally he took out that last pink marble. And see, it allowed him to count his days, or I'd say count his weeks. And so because of that, there were times in which he changed plans. There were times in which he invested. There was times he realized, I only have so much time, so I'm making them a priority within my life. We need to live with that wisdom. That's why Moses said, Lord, teach us to count our days. I read a book just a few months ago called Die with Zero. An interesting book, but one of the premises of the book is the fact that most of us don't live with that understanding that life is temporal, that we only have so much life, but also we only have so much time to do. And he was saying some of us put off enjoying, like we love to ski, and rather than spending money to ski when you're 40, we wait till we're retired at 70, and then we don't want to ski because our legs hurt. I mean, he said, you've got to live with wisdom in how you do it. And he said, you've got to understand how much time you have. So in the book, one thing he said, you should go to these really good actuary sites that can take information like your health, your parents' health, and all that stuff, and they can give you an estimate of how long you're going to live. It's the kind of sites that insurance companies make, because if you buy life insurance, they're betting that you're going to live. You're betting you're going to die, just so you know. That's how it works. And so they want to use those tables to best guess. And so I went through all the questions, and it came up that I should live till I'm 90, all right? Which I was kind of a little disappointed. I wanted to go farther, but I know it's just an average, so I said, okay, well, that's my actuary. And then he said, okay, now what you need to do is you need to count and understand how many days you have. Literally count your days. Not just that, but how many big events. So there was it's a free app you can load down that's called Countdown. And so I loaded that app. And once you put in your information, it tells me that I have lived for 23,082 days. But I have 9,790 days left. See, if you put this app in like when you're in your 20s, you're going to see that peak until finally, guess what? You're going to be alive less longer than you live, or less days. But not only does it have the days, you can put certain events in there. Like I only have 27 Christmases left. Guess what? That just went down by one. I've got 300 rounds of golf because I know about how much I'll play. It's in there. I have 24 big getaways with my wife, Lonnie. I mean, different things. And you could put in here how many weeks you have with your kids before they graduate. But the idea was to look at it not to get depressed, okay? But literally to count our days so we can have wisdom in how we spend it. See, I think we should slow down this time of year and actually review, reflect, and realize that our days are limited. We should look at our previous years and say, how did I do in 2024? I mean, most of us is kind of blur, right? Could you look at January of 2024 and said, what was good? What was the highlight of that month? Because I promise you, it may not have been a real big highlight, but you may have went to the movies, but there was a highlight, okay? What was the low light? What was the best? What was the worst? Could you look through your year? Could you look at areas and say, hey, I really did well there. I knocked it out of the park. I know I pleased God there. I know I made a good choice. But could you also look and said, yeah, I kind of missed that one. Most of us struggle not with setting a good goal, but with putting together the steps of action and then following through to make it a reality. Living with intentionality can be the difference in our life. It can be a difference of reaching the end of our life feeling frustrated, feeling like, man, I blew it, and reaching the end of our life, feeling the pleasure of God that we've pleased Him, and living a life that's also brought pleasure to us. Because guess what? There's this really cool paradigm that when I'm pleasing God, when I'm doing what God wants, ultimately, that brings me the most pleasure back. There's a book called Good to Great, written by Jim Collins. He shares an interesting story. One of the chapters is called the 20-Mile March. And I think understanding this chapter helps us know why not only do we need to set a goal, but we need to understand what it is to fulfill it. In that, he shares the story of two men that had teams that were racing to the South Pole in 1911. And they had different ways in which they were going to do it. One wanted to use mainly dog sleds. One wanted to use the gas-powered snowmobiles and different things. They had different things. One of the guys, his name was Ronald Amerson. The other one was Robert Falcon Scott. And one of the things Amerson did, when he calculated how long it would take, he realized he could go with what he had. He could, if he marched 20 miles a day with his team, he could get to the South Pole and he could get back in a safe time, have the supplies, he'd be all right. But he made a decision. He said, if it's a great day, I could be tempted to go farther, but I'm not. I'm going to stop. And I'm just going to let the men rest. He was using dog sleds. I'm going to let the dogs rest. And we're just going to take that time to get some extra rest. But when it was bad, when there were terrible storms, which they were, we were going to push it through. And if it took us 20 hours, we were going to make 20 miles, knowing that we'd eventually catch up as good days and bad days was hit it. He called it the 20-mile march. And because of that 20-mile march, they were able to march every day 20 miles. They left supplies and marked them because they were the supplies they would have to have on their way back. They made it to the South Pole, and they made it back safely. The other man, Scott, he decided that, you know what, we should let the weather determine how far we go. If it's a beautiful day, why stop at 20 miles when we could do 30 or 35 miles? Because we're going to have bad days and we won't make it. And so if it's a really bad day and we've worked hard enough, we can actually stay in our tents and not risk the danger of traveling in blinding snows. So he let weather determine what he did as a team. And they did make it to the South Pole, but they didn't ever make it back. Some of the supplies they left, they weren't able to find. And slowly they started passing away until finally every person in his team, including Scott, died. The 20-mile march literally was the difference of life and death. Can I say in your life, the most important thing is your daily method of operation. What entails every single day. I love what John Maxwell said. He said, success is not found in a day, but success is found daily. Again, not found in a day. There's nothing you can do in one day in a big project to give you success. But if you do the right thing day after day after day after day, that is where success is found. So here's my challenge. As we enter 2025, don't dream up resolutions and spend some time instead thinking and praying about where you need to be next year. About saying, God, how can I be intentional? I think first reviewing and being honest. Where did I do well? Where did I not? Where was I on course? Where was I off course? And so learn from last year so you don't repeat the same mistakes. Learn from last year. Double down on where you succeeded. Make improvements on where you failed. Intentionality is the difference not just in saying what you will and won't do, but it's making a plan you can stick with. Intentionality means creating habits and disciplines that help you achieve your goals. So the year of 2025 and beyond can be successful because of the intentionality. So I just want to look at 3 areas. I would say there are more areas that are specific for you that you ought to really think about, that you ought to put some goals into. But let me say, I think I can safely say there's 3 of those that apply to every one of us in this room today. The first one is this: intentionality in our relationship with God. Intentionality in our relationship with God. A deeper relationship with God doesn't just happen by accident. We must intentionally make Him a priority of our day, of our week, of our year. You know, no great thing really happens by accident. I mean, you can say, hey, Post-it notes were discovered by accident, or this way. Yeah, but even that, they were working for something. I'm just saying, you don't all of a sudden find yourself in a great relationship with God and it just happened. You made choices. You had a desire. You made sacrifices to connect to Him. Look at the verse there in Psalm 63:1, David speaking. It says, "You, God, are my God. Earnestly I seek you. I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you in a dry and parched land where there is no water." You get the picture there? David's saying, God, I want you like a man in the desert wants a drink of water. I want you just like someone who I'm just so thirsty. I thirst for you. There is an internal longing from you. And that happened because David intentionally sought God. We see this, that David regularly sought God both personally and privately. If you read through the Psalms, you'll read about it. You'll read about David seeking God in the morning. You'll read about David seeking God in the afternoon. We'll talk about David seeking God in the night watches. He was seeking God. It was a continual thing. It wasn't a one and done. It wasn't, hey, I'm having a quiet time. I'm having my prayer. I've read Scripture. Great. I've checked that box, God. You stay here. I'm going to go live my life. I'll see you tomorrow. It was, God, you are part of my morning. You're the part of my afternoon. You're the part of my evening. You're a part of everything there is. A few weeks ago, I spoke about praying without ceasing. That relationship with God is where we open the day with prayer and we stay in that mode of prayer all day long. That hacking cough where constantly we realize we're in God's presence. Constantly we realize that God is with us, that He is there doing life with us, always within our reach to comfort us, to encourage us, to direct us, to guide us. David lived that kind of life. He was intentional both personally and privately. David also prioritized worship. We see David worshiping God. We see David, when there's a great victory, dancing before God into a way that some people didn't find were very good, but he was showing that praising God publicly. We see in one of the toughest times in David's life when he lost a young child. When that child passed away, he had been praying and fasting, and he was there. And when he saw his servants talking, and he said, "Is the child dead?" And they were scared to say anything, and they told him. It says David got up. He cleaned himself off and he went to the temple and worshiped, and he came back and he ate. See, even in that, he went to the temple and he worshiped God. See, he was able to worship God even in times that weren't the best times. Even in things in which he would have said, God, I would do it another way. I wish that wouldn't have happened. See, you let those bad events in life drive him to God, not drive him away from God. See, some of us think, man, I just wish God, if it was a great year, everything would be great. I'll never forget the little thing I read that says, all sunshine makes the desert. See, we have the good and the bad, and sometimes it's those toughest things in life that are crucibles that drive us to God if we let them. C.S. Lewis says, God whispers kind of in the best of times, and He yells at us in our pain. What does He mean? In the best of times, it's almost hard to hear God. In the worst of times, God is there. We can feel His presence. See, I don't know what kind of year you've had. I don't know what you've been through, but is this a year that has driven you towards God? Or have you let that wedge get between you and God, and these events that you wished had not happened have driven you from God? See, he trusts God even in adversity. He sought God continually in what he did. Now, there was a time years ago I had a daytimer. You guys remember daytimers? There was a great, put all your stuff in. Now I put everything on a Google Calendar, makes it easier, keeps up on all my devices. But I would say the most important things on my life are scheduled. I've already scheduled some vacation time for next year. I've scheduled some events beyond next year. The important things, they get on my calendar. Why? Because if they're important, I want to make sure I make time for them. I want to make sure they fit in the schedule and everything else fits around it. The question is, are we making an appointment to be with God every day? See, I would say one of the most important things, if you want to grow in your relationship with God, is that spending time with God every single day. Setting a specific time to be with God. The morning tends to work best, but a time we can be with Him, that we can spend some time, here's the thing, reading God's Word, praying, and reflecting. Those three things. And if you haven't been doing it, I want to say one of the things Satan will try to do is make you feel guilty and say, well, you ought to spend an hour a day with God if you really love Him. No, start with 5 minutes, let it expand. There are some great devotional books that you can get that have a Devo, has a scripture. It kind of applies to different things that you can do, and you can use that. We have our daily Devo. If you've not been a part of that, we're going to restart it this Wednesday. This next year, we're going to go through the Old and New Testament. We're going to be looking at major passages. So whereas before we may have covered a whole chapter that may have 5 different ideas, now it's going to be a singular concept. Like the first day is on creation of the world. The second day is going to be on the fall of man. And we're going to study those things so you can read it, and then you can pop on the video and have a staff member kind of encourage you to apply what you've just read. That's an easy way. You can sign up for that on the website. You'll get a text about 7:30 every morning. My thing is, find something you can do. Schedule it. Make time for it. Make it a priority in what you do. I would say weekly, prioritize your time to be at church, to be in a small group. Guess what, guys? Great job this morning. You realize there's a lot of people who said, it's a holiday, so I'm just going to take it off, God. It's a holiday. You made this a priority. Well done. I always found that when I'm together with others, God can speak to me. When I worship with others, there's a certain power there. When I'm here and I hear a message and I'm saying, God, here I am, speak to me, there's a power that's there. You've made it a priority. I know for a lot of you, because I recognize a lot of your faces, I know you're in a life group. And can I tell you, that's the next step, but it's an important step. See, church is great, but life group is where we connect in a relationship, where we can know and be known, where we can love and be loved, where we can serve and be served. It's a place where there are people who are going to be there to help meet your needs. See, something terrible happens, you or a loved one goes in the hospital, you call us, there's going to be a pastor there. I can tell you, if there's a meal need, we'll create up a meal train. But if you're in a life group and I show up as a pastor, I can tell you your life group is already going to be there. We don't have to do a meal train because you know what? Your class is going to do it for you. And they know you don't like chicken, so you won't get chicken in your meal tray. They'll know your house needs to be cut the grass, and they'll cut the grass. In other words, there's a level of connectedness. God changes us in the context of relationship. And if we look in Scripture, starting in Acts, we see 2 things. We see that they met what? They met in the temple corporately, and they met house to house in a small group. And here you can meet corporately in this room, but then in our smaller rooms, make that a priority. And start small. Just spend that time with God. Find out. I would say the third thing you could really do is find someone to hold you accountable. In that, especially in that time alone with God. I've done this before with people. A lot of times if someone comes to know Christ, I'll give them the book, Purpose-Driven Life. And I'll say, I want you to read a chapter, and then I want you to text me, I read the chapter, and just give me a sentence. What do you feel God said to you through that chapter? I do it for a couple reasons. One, it makes them think, not just read, they got to interact with it. But then what happens about 5 o'clock, if I don't get a text from him, I shoot a text, hey, how's it going? Did you do your Devo? And I'll either get one back, nope, I haven't, I'll do it in a few minutes. Or, oh yeah, I did, I forgot, I'll get back with you in a moment. But by extending that text, there's a bit of accountability, and that's kind of one way. What's really cool is get someone else that's a friend of yours and say, I realize I need time alone with God. Let's do that. Let's do the daily Devo 5 days a week, or let's get this book and let's read it. But we're going to take it to the next level. We're going to call each other and say, hey, what did God say to you? And if you can do that with 3 people, it's even better, because I can tell you a lot of times 2 people forget, but that third person will hold you accountable. You guys forgot. Do it. If it's important to you, set accountability. Be intentional in your relationship with God. Second, intentional in our relationship with others. Intentional in our relationship with others. If we look at the priority of our relationships outside of our relationship with God, it's kind of like concentric circles. It starts first in our family. I would say the first person who should be a priority should be your spouse if you're married. They should be the top priority in your life. And then after that, it's going to be your kids, and then other family, and then it's going to be your friends, and then kind of that community of coworkers or neighbors. It's going to work out. And when it looks at priorities, when you can't meet all the needs, you start at the center and you meet those needs first. There's a verse, it's in your notes. It's Ephesians 5, 15 and 16. It says, be careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Just a little commentary on that. If we look at this emphasizes the intentionality in the Christian life by urging believers to live purposely and thoughtfully. Paul instructs them to carefully examine their conduct, avoiding thoughtless or reactive living. He contrasts foolishness, which is driven by worldly priorities, with wisdom, which is informed by God's Word and His Spirit. Living wisely requires aligning decisions with God's eternal perspective. Paul calls believers to make the most of every opportunity, seizing time as a valuable resource to glorify God and advance His kingdom. Together, these commands highlight the importance of living intentionally, using every moment to reflect God's purpose and God's priority. You get that? Be careful how you live as wise. Remember, we were told in Psalms 90 to count our days so that we may be wise. Now, here in the New Testament, we're told to be careful how we live, not as the unwise, who aren't thinking about, who aren't seeing the value. So here's a question. Does your spouse feel like they are a priority in your life? It's easy to say it. The question, is it true? Tough question to ask. You better pick the right time to do it. But it could be healthy between now and the end of the year to say, "Hun, do you feel like you're the top priority in my life?" And then you have to be honest, because if you're asking how they feel and they say no, you can't argue with how they feel. But what you can say is, okay, what could I do? You can do the number thing, 1 to 10. If 10 is the best and 1 is the worst, where would I be in making your priority? Kind of an easier question. It's not black or white. And they may say a 7. They may say a 6. But here's the question you ask is very simple. Not, I can't believe I'm that low. Okay, it's just like, okay, if I'm a 7, what would it do? I need to do this year to go to an 8 or a 9. Don't aim for the 10 yet. I'm just saying. Okay, what could I do? And then they may specifically say, you know what, when you come home, it's like I'm not there. You're still involved in work. Or, you don't ever take my call. It always, whatever it is, they can tell you and you can improve it. One of the things Lonnie and I practice in our life is what we call the 24-hour getaway. This came about when I was a pastor working with couples that were blending their marriages, and found how tough it was with the his and hers and ours and all the blending of stuff. And one of the things I encouraged them to do was first align the visitation so that you had all the kids and you had a week without kids if there was that thing, so you could focus on one another. But I found even that was busy, so I started saying get away for 24 hours. Get away on a Friday night, spend the night, don't come back home till a Saturday night so you can focus on each other. And guess what? I had couples come back raving how important it was. So when we got married 17 years ago, blending a family, guess what? We started practicing that. And I can say in 17 years of marriage, we may have missed 10 times, 10 months out of 12 times 17, high math for me, but that big number that we've missed over those years because we've made it a priority, because we've calendared it. But I can tell you, it's special. We get away. We get a meal together. We may go to a movie. We may not. We may just hang around. There's something special about making each other that priority where you can have affection and communication and connectedness, and things can happen without being sidetracked by a honey-do list and all this, because now we're empty nesters and we could stay home, but you know what? It's not the same. Now, some of you can say, man, that's expensive. And it's not cheap. Now, if you're a Dave Ramsey fan, I want to apologize up front. We use a Marriott card where we put all our stuff on it and we get free nights. We do pay it off, but we do it, so we haven't paid for a room in like 15 years. So that's a nice part of what we have there. But I can tell you, if you hadn't to pay for it, it's a whole bunch cheaper than a divorce. Whole bunch cheaper than marriage counseling. You can get one night, 24 hours with your spouse for less than 1 hour with a counselor, and it's a whole bunch more enjoyable, all right? I'm just saying, what are you doing to make it a priority? Next, how about with your kids? Are you making them a priority? Last year when I was evaluating my year and looking back, I realized that especially since my kids are adult now, I wasn't getting one-to-one time like I wanted. I saw them as a group. We had family lunches and things like that, but I wasn't getting them like I wanted. So I set a goal that once a month I was going to try to do a meal, a breakfast, a lunch, a coffee, something with each of my adult kids. And that was my goal. Can I tell you, I did not do as well as I want. It did not happen every month. But can I tell you this? It happened more last year than any other year since they've been an adult. In other words, see, I succeeded. I failed forward. So I'm going to continue it because I want to do it. But I got to work a little harder. When you have 4 or 5 people you're trying to do schedules with, it's hard to work it out. But I'm going to make it a point. I'm going to do it. Why? Because that's an important thing for me to invest in that time. It may be with your friends. Can I tell you, at the end of your life, you're not going to be sitting on the bed saying, honey, can you bring me that 401k statement one more time? I want to look back when we busted that $1 million mark And wow, I'm dying with so much. You know, I mean, it's not going to happen. I mean, yes, you need to save enough to take care of yourself. You do. But I'm just saying, at the end of life, you're going to be caring more about the relationships. You're going to want your family around you. You're going to want those closest to you. That's what's going to matter. And the memories you've created with those that you love the most. That's what's going to truly matter. And for some of you, it may be friendships. I have a couple special relationships. I have a guy, Alan Renfro. He lives in Birmingham. We've been best friends since we were 11. And you know, now we're both so busy, we have to work hard, but once a quarter we try to get together, either me going down there or him coming here. We talk on the phone regularly, but try to connect, because that's a relationship where he has been with me in my highest of highs. He's been with me at my lowest of lows, and he's a lifetime friend. But here's the issue. If I let it go, it'll just drift. I have another friend, Tony Rapucci, who for over 25 years, we've been getting coffees or breakfasts together. And, you know, and for a while, after he retired, he moved to Harvest, and we went probably 5-6 months. We didn't see each other, and all of a sudden we were like, hey, we need that. So we started driving to Harvest, or him driving here. And it's important because those are relationships that matter. And I'm just saying, if you aren't intentional, these relationships will drift. The relationship with your spouse, if you're not intentional, it will drift. That's one of the reasons that we have a marriage retreat coming up here in January. Still can sign up for it. Where you get away, again, that 24-hour with content. You're going to have some time to be there. Now, some of you, one of the things you may not know if you haven't signed up, we only have so many rooms, but one of the things you can do is you can attend it, go home, spend the night, and come back. It's not the best. I would say staying in the hotel overnight's the best, but if you can't, you still can get the content. Can you imagine what it could mean to your spouse if you said, hey, I'm taking the initiative, we're going to go. We're going to do it. Make it a priority. There are those who are few but vital in your life. Are you intentionally building into that relationship with one another? Last point, intentionality for a life that matters forever. Now, again, intentionality for a life that can matter together. I use the word can there purposely, because here's the thing. Your life just won't matter forever if you aren't intentional. Your life can kind of be like a flash. It can be here and gone and leave no lasting impact. Or you can live a life that can impact generations after generations after generations. But if you do it, if it's going to matter forever, it's going to reverberate because you made it a priority. I served as youth pastor in a church in South Carolina that became a church in the early 1800s. And they had a graveyard back there where members had been buried since it was a church. And I would go back and I'd look at the gravestones, much simpler than ones we have nowadays. And you have to get down and read it, and I would read the name. And I found out a whole bunch of people died in their 30s and 40s back then. I'm just saying, you didn't live nearly as long. And I would calculate when they were born and when they died. I'd get their age, but then I would calculate how long they'd been dead. And in that cemetery, the mass majority of people had been dead 2, 3, 4 times longer than they had ever lived. Guys, you get that? You're dead a lot longer than you're alive. And the most important thing you can do in this life is first make sure you're ready for the next. The most relationship you want to make sure of is your relationship with God. Is that confidence that if my eyes close for this reality, I will wake up with the reality of a relationship with Christ. I know there is a time and a place in which I put my faith in Christ. My sin was placed on Him, His righteousness on us. It's like I talk to someone, hey, when did you become a Christian? They'll say things, I just kind of grew up in church, or kind of like, I just kind of always became more, And so if they have a wedding ring, I said, did you get married? When did you get married? You know the date? And most of the time they will. And I would say, you realize there are no common law Christians. I'm just saying. Just like there's a time and date when you said I do to her and she said I do to you, there needs to be a time and date in which you put your relationship with Christ. And if you don't know for sure, put a stake in it. Make sure for sure you're connected to Him. But then after that, the most important thing you can do is to invest in those things that truly will matter forever. That truly will matter forever. Paul, when he was speaking to Timothy, there was a section talking about money and contentment and all this. And Paul kind of makes a joint at the end of it. We're about to read it. When Paul is talking to those who were wealthy, to Timothy, to what he should say to those who are wealthy in this life. And he gave a challenge for them. Look at it in your verse on the screen, or you can look on your notes. He said this, command them, he's talking to them here are those who have been blessed financially, okay, to be good, to be rich in good deeds, to be generous, willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take a hold of life that is truly life. You get that? Paul was saying, listen, Timothy, there are some people in your congregation who are extremely blessed, that have financial prosperity, and encourage them not just to get comfort in themselves, but to be generous, to give to others. I would say to invest in those things that will matter forever. In doing that, they're going to please God. They're going to lay up. They're going to be transferring that treasure to heaven where moth or rust can't destroy it. They're going to be investing in things that will matter forever. Now, for some of us, we're easy to say, yeah, I'll do that. I remember a guy I know who was one of the wealthiest guys I ever knew, and he basically kept the first $250,000 and he gave the rest to God. Now, there's some of you in this room go, I'll sign up for that one, right? But can I tell you, there were years he gave away 2 or 3 times more than he kept. Because he just said, hey, God has just blessed me. I mean, he said, you can only buy so much stuff. You can only take so many trips. I think God made me smart with money so I could invest. And I think God blessed him because he was doing that. He was blessed to do that. Now, for some of you say, yeah, Steve, I'm not that person. If I was going to ask you, how do you define rich? What would you say? I mean, I think all of us have a number. And here's what I'll say. Almost all of us, the number is way more than we have, right? Do you know how the Bible defines the word rich? It is simply an abundance above one's needs. That's the definition of rich. I don't know about you, but I've got an abundance above my needs. I got more than one car. I got a lot of clothes in the closet. I can open the pantry and I could eat for days and days and days before I need to buy more food. You know, I have discretionary income. If I want to go play around the golf, I can. I am blessed. Compared to the world and the people who've lived, I'm incredibly blessed. And the question is, am I sharing that blessing with others? Am I doing in a way that matters forever? See, Paul was saying we are to invest in things that matter forever. And those of you, I'm speaking to you, this is closed circuit. If you consider Willowbrook your home, I'm speaking to you. If you don't, go ahead and check out. Check your phone out. You're good. But if you consider Willowbrook your home, are you investing here? Because see, what you give is the reason we have lights on. It's the reason you can hear me. It's the reason that you have pastors here who are able to spend their full time focusing on reaching people for Christ, for discipleship, for working, for the things we're doing. You are investing in that. Not only that, we don't keep all you give us. You read about on the bumper, or you heard where it said over 100,000 people came to know Christ. We give around the world so that missions and missionaries can spend their full focus on reaching people for Christ. And I'm just saying, are you being faithful with what God's given you? Are you being a blessing, as Timothy said? Are you doing that? I'm just saying a simple thing. If everybody was doing what you were doing, how would we be as a church? Would it be like really not much light in here today? Or we'd be, oh my goodness, we have so much. We're like Moses, stop giving. Figure out where to give somewhere else. We don't know. We got all we need. What difference would it make? Now, I'll speak here also because it's not just money. You guys have talents and you have time. In other words, again, if Willowbrook is your home, speaking to you, are you using your gifts here to advance the kingdom? See, a lot of times we get this consumer mentality that comes into the church, and we show up to enjoy a great service, to enjoy coffee, to enjoy a life group, to enjoy, and are we contributing our giftedness? Because I can tell you, you're gifted by God. That means you do some things better than anybody else in this congregation. And if you aren't using their gifts, there's someone inferior not doing as good a job as you would do. And you are missing advancing the kingdom with your gifts and talents. And here's the problem. When it comes to giftedness, if this is your home, take the initiative to serve. That is, it's not a game of tag. And when Steve catches me and says, tag, I'll do it. No, it's saying, what can I do? It's going to our preschool and saying, hey, which weeks do you need? It means going to our welcome teams and saying, hey, yeah, I can greet, I can welcome people, I can give out a bulletin. It means going to our youth and say, hey, who can I influence? Other teenagers, mine are gone now, or I don't have them yet, but I'd like to have an impact. It means, dude, wouldn't it be great to be at a place where you go and say, can I serve? And they say, well, you can, but it's going to be 3 months. We're kind of filled up till then. And in a church this size, that's not crazy to say. But I'd say again, if everybody was serving the way you're serving, were you a better church or a worse church? See, are you investing in things that matter forever? Because I can promise you, at the end of your life, you're going to look back and say, what difference did it make? My life is marked because I had some people who chose to serve in high school who loved Jesus, and they were cool people to me, and they were a challenge to me to walk with Christ and say, you know what? They made a difference. I had someone who poured into my life when I was a teenager and you reached out to me that kept me on track when I could have been knocked off track. And guess what? I believe a part of everything God has used in my life and every way in which God will use me in the future, they're getting part of the credit for because they invested in me and invested in me. They invested in eternity. Guys, we're about to clock out this year, 2024, but a new year starts on Wednesday. And can I challenge you that maybe in the next couple of days, you'll kind of just sit down, just get a calendar out, and just say, how was last year? Just look at January. What was January? What was February? Look at the highs. Look at the lows. Look at the good choices. Look at the poor. Say, what can I do so next year I want to live a life intentionally, one that pleases God. But here's the good news. If it pleases God, I promise it will please you too. And say, God, I want to live that life with intentionality. And when you do that, you never know what you started, the impact it can make in your life, but in the life of so many others. We're all going to start a new year. The question is it going to be a year of intentionality? And if it is, it can be one that can be the beginning of something that marks the rest of our life.